Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Alumni Career Empowerment webinar. My name is Michelle Monique Groenewald. I'm an economist and academic here at the Northwest-Universiteit. So given the reality of the COVID-19 pandemic, we thought this would be a great opportunity for us to discuss with NWU alumnus the economic challenges, but also the opportunities that have been posed by COVID-19. So today is really an opportunity to ask how you can position yourself, whether it be as an entrepreneur or a job seeker, given the new realities that we're facing under the COVID-19 pandemic. So perhaps just to give a bit of a macroeconomic context to what it is that we're facing, South Africa's premier source of unemployment statistics is something that we call the Quarterly Labour Force Survey that provides us with these statistics. And quarter one tells us that our current unemployment rate, and this is by the narrow definition, is at 30.1%, a pretty harrowing figure. Now, you may not be part of that unemployment statistic. You may perhaps be underemployed, you may perhaps just be unhappy with the job that you're currently in, or you may just be looking for newer and broader horizons. Regardless, we really have something for everyone today. I think what is particularly important to note, though, is between the ages of 25 to 34 years of age, our unemployment statistic sits at 37.5%. So really to drive home the importance of us having this conversation of where you position yourself as an entrepreneur or as a job seeker. And so we're really excited about the panel that we've put together for you today, all NWU alumni. They certainly have a very unique perspective, each one of them. And we're really looking forward to hearing what it is that they have to share with us today. So without any further ado, first up we have Francois Fouchier. He is a Northwest-Universiteit alumnus, has had a very illustrious career as a professional economist, including having worked for Wharton Econometric Forecasting Associates and Barclays Capital. Francois, looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
A very good morning to everybody. My name is Francois Fouchier, and I'm from a company called Trade Research Advisory, a spin-out company from the Northwest-Universiteit. And I'm going to spend a few minutes with you to take you through how we think positioning yourself as an entrepreneur, as a job seeker within the pandemic sort of makes sense. I think it is very apt to start by asking a question about what is the real crisis that we are facing. And the question is the cure in fact worse than the disease? Why? Well, simply because there's probably a less than 10% chance that some people may die from the virus. But there's definitely a 100% chance that millions of people will actually starve to death. Please note in the first bullet, I am referring to the chance that people may die from the virus, not actually contract the virus. Most of us will contract it. Very few will actually pass away due to it. So these are exceptional times, and it calls for exceptional action. And governments have to do whatever it takes, but they must make sure that they do keep the receipts of the rescue and recovery packages that have been made available. That is absolutely very important. This is the COVID-19 storm brewing over the president with an umbrella for emergency measures, and the country is shivering, asking, will it be enough? This crisis came like a bolt out of the blue, and leadership was very quick on the health management side of things. But the real leadership test is out with regards to the economic rescue and recovery packages, how they can be implemented, how efficiently they can be rolled out in order to assist a very, very struggling economy at the moment. So I want to offer you a couple of tips with regards to the pandemic's impact. First and foremost, this won't stop human progress, but it certainly will interrupt it, and it has interrupted it in a big way. The global economy has gone to hell in a handbasket, and it happened overnight. But this shock is both a demand and a supply shock to the economy, as we refer to it in the literature. It's very similar to the oil price fallout that we've seen in the early days of the pandemic. This shock is different. It's all front-loaded. The global financial crisis in 2008 was about 18 months of bad news that dripped into the market. The Great Depression in 1929 was far more gradual, about 3 years. But remember, back then, communication and the word traveled far slower around the world. But with the current pandemic, within less than a month, stock markets, commodity prices, export demand, remittances, which are very important for developing countries, capital flows, capital market liquidity, credit spreads, employment, consumption, investment, capex, tourism, all have been in free fall. and it will be a very gradual battle to resurface again. It's been a very synchronized downturn, but lifting the lockdowns is not so synchronized, as we've seen from so many efforts in different jurisdictions, taking 2 steps forward and sort of taking a 1 step back. And many global supply chain interruptions will suffocate certain industries. I don't think they will completely destroy some of those industries, but some industries will be significantly smaller after the pandemic than prior to the pandemic. I want to offer you a few tips as well in terms of how to think about this pandemic. This is the largest shock the global economy has seen since World War II, and even for countries with very little COVID-19 infections. Countries that prevent additional economic infection will be the best off. The crisis management challenge at the moment is compounded by huge gaps in knowledge and information. There are many things we know that we don't know, and that's not too good. There are many things we know that we don't know. There are many things we don't know that we don't know. That's even worse. And then there are many things we know that are simply wrong. So there's overwhelming uncertainty in the process of decision-making at present. But it's not all doom and gloom. There most definitely are some green shoots, and I'm going to discuss a few with you. The first one is the digitalization. And this is forced change. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, who can adapt? This is the COVID-19 wrecking ball, and this is people sitting around the boardroom table in the business saying, digital transformation is years away. I don't see our company having to change anytime soon. If you don't embrace the digital side of business, it's going to be a very, very tough future that awaits you. Then for exporters, I want to mention this, the weaker exchange rate. Everybody always referred to the rand-dollar exchange rate, and they become disappointed and lackluster when they see an ongoing depreciation cycle. This is the dollar of the chart of dollar value over the last 5 years. You can see in December 2015, we went over 16 when we had Nene Gate and a new finance minister for only a weekend. Then things improved and we had Cyril elected, Ramaphosa that existed for a couple of months, and we dipped below 12 against the dollar. Then we sort of oscillated around the 14 level. Then the pandemic hit and we shot up to way over 19. But in the meantime, it has retraced a little bit. It always comes back. The market overreacts. But I think the big question is, to what extent will it come back this time around? We suspect it will probably be weaker for longer. Why? Because there's a paradigm shift due to the credit ratings downgrade that South Africa underwent in late March, just after the pandemic started. South Africa lost its international credit grade rating, and we are now considered junk status. So there are many international funds that control large amounts of dollars that cannot, according to regulation, invest in South African capital markets any longer. And the lack of those inflows will result in the exchange rate probably remaining a little bit weaker for a little bit longer. But for exporters, this is great news. If you focus with your product or your service on the external market, the market beyond the borders of South Africa, then this is great news. This is not going to save an inefficient exporter, but it is going to give a little bit of an edge over a short period of time to exporters from South Africa into the rest of the world. So keep that in the back of your mind. It is there, use it. I want to conclude by saying, or by sharing with you a couple of characteristics of the so-called new normal that we find ourselves in. First and foremost, globalization 2.0 has in fact just kicked off. Whether we like it, whether we don't like it, it is here, and it is probably here to stay for a while. However, autarky is not the answer. Retreating to isolation will cause more harm than what it actually will do good. Autarky is just a fancy word in literature referring to, well, we don't want to deal with the outside world, we sort of want to be like a hermit. But more autarky and less globalization, unfortunately, will be felt in the immediate wake of the pandemic, as we have seen right now with so many countries imposing temporary trade measures on personal protection equipment, not allowing those exports to leave their countries to go to the rest of the world. South Africa has done the same in terms of preventing certain exports, preventing certain imports. That doesn't help the situation. So we're probably going to see more of this happening, but hopefully during the course of the year and next year, matters will be relaxed again. Another thing that I want to touch on, and this is not spoken about in the mainstream media. The pandemic is likely to escalate the US-China trade conflict, perhaps to something beyond a trade war. Certainly hope this does not happen, but while the US-China trade war is going on, there are some great opportunities. South African exporters have cheaper access to China versus USA exports. And the flip side of that is also true. South African exporters have cheaper access to the USA compared to Chinese exporters. Why? Because once Donald Trump came into the White House a few years ago, he started to really take on China. And what he's done is he's imposed import tariffs for Chinese exports going into the US. China didn't like that, and they retaliated. They did the same. So at the moment, there are bilateral tariffs between these two superpowers. But that means that there are no tariffs. Well, there are some tariffs for South African on South African products being exported from South Africa to the US, but significantly less compared to their Chinese counterparts, and vice versa. If you have to compare South African exporters going into China versus USA exporters going into China as well. So that's a benefit. That's a massive, massive opportunity. However, I think what has transpired out of China over the last 2 decades would probably lead us to say the following, that a strategically astute action would include to reduce concentration risk with China because of all the, because of China being sort of singled out around the world as causing a lot of sort of harm to the global system. The problem lies, however, in the fact that China is the bedrock of the global supply chain. We think that on the import side, what makes sense at the moment is to diversify supply chain sources or find, which means developing new suppliers. On the export side, we think diversifying the range of export markets makes sense, explore new and adjacent markets, especially those markets surrounding China, like Vietnam, like Cambodia, which have benefited tremendously over the last decade or so from China's emergence. These may be smaller markets, perhaps, but they do have lower levels of risk. Lower export earnings volatility is therefore expected, so less boom and bust cycles. Then lastly, on this one, on the characteristics of the new normal, increased level of digital communication for service delivery, which makes some services trade less sensitive to social distancing disruptions. Embrace the digital side of things. It is the future. It may retrace a little bit once all the lockdown measures have been lifted, but it's not going to retrace significantly. It is here to stay. Embrace it. Use it to your advantage. So, how do you view the world? Is your glass half empty or is your glass half full? We think it is simply too dire to view the glass as half empty. Even with a 10% real GDP decline in the South African economy for this year, it still means that 90% of the economy remains. And the worst is most definitely behind us. The whole pie has not evaporated overnight. It is a little bit smaller. Things will pick up towards the end of the year. Things will most definitely pick up next year. But there will be an adjustment, and you have a focus on where you want to focus, or you have a choice in terms of where you want to focus. If you are going to focus only on survival, it's going to be more of the same. If you are going to focus on change, then I think you have a real opportunity of benefiting from the changing circumstances. And then lastly, in order to conclude, there's this ongoing quest for growth, for economic growth, for financial growth, for all types of growth. But remember one thing. Everybody wants to grow, but nobody wants to change. If you are so consumed in your operational responsibilities that you think you are too busy to consider a new way of doing things, to consider something like a round wheel as an invention in order to make you more productive, then it's going to be a very difficult environment. So I want to conclude with that to say that the quest for growth is the answer lies in changing, in adapting to the conditions, in adapting to the circumstances, making it your own, and moving from there on forward. Thank you very much. That is me. My name is Francois Fouchier. Those are my contact details. That is my email. That is my cell phone number. It's our website. You're more than welcome to contact me. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for that, Francois. Some very interesting perspectives that you brought up there. I think something that really struck me in what you were saying is the importance of the different actors that we have. That we really need to take a look at what is government's role and responsibility, but so too what role the private sector needs to play in each one of us as individual citizens within the country. So definitely food for thought and lots of opportunity to debate. Right, our second panelist that we have is none other than Olivier Chimbedi. He is also an NWU alumnus. He's currently the executive director of Pax Africana Holdings, has had a vast career at Ernst & Young. And something that I think is really important to highlight is that he was actually the founder of the Young Entrepreneurs Business Organization, or as some of you on campus may know it, YEBO. And so this is really a man who has a lot of enthusiasm and passion for his craft, someone who has some unique perspectives. And I think it's really an opportunity for us to learn from. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Take it away, Olivier.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for that lovely introduction. You've always been quite good with words in the short time I've gotten to know you, so thank you for that. As Michelle's rightfully introduced me, my name is Olivier Chimidi. I'm an alumni at the Northwest-University's Vaal Triangle campus. It's quite a privilege to be part of this webinar, to take part. I was a bit nervous in the beginning, but I figured it's an opportunity to give a 2 cents about my experience and how one navigates their way during this trying times. So, funny enough, as the lockdown was about to be launched in South Africa, I found myself in the Middle East. I was doing a project in Kuwait where I've been back and forth for the last couple of years, and I was sitting at a restaurant called Black Tap, an American burger joint, somewhere like a Burger King but a little bit better, with 2 of my colleagues from Bahrain and from Qatar. And as we were finishing up our main meals, we just get a WhatsApp from our work group saying, if you can get out of the country tonight, get out of the country. So you can imagine that's quite an alarming thing to receive as a dessert, right? One would have preferred a shake instead, but we got what we got. So fortunately, due to technology, due to a great HR team and a great organization, we were able to find ourselves in taxis back to the hotel and able to get to the airport, and which was quite a situation at the airport. Many people who may not have necessarily been privileged to have heard the news at the time, whether they're working underground or whether they're working at stations, were now rushing all to the airport to be able to get out. And fortunately, I was able to make my way into South Africa. And at the time, South Africa hadn't yet gone under lockdown, official lockdown. So as we landed, we all got tested by the South African National Defence Force. And I was cleared, so I managed to come in without any issues. So that was just a case of how the pandemic has affected many different people. We did see a great number of South Africans being stuck abroad, and we thank the government for their initiatives and everybody else who partaked in bringing them back. Now, in the midst of all of this, I was approached by a competitive company who had asked me to join them in a somewhat of a senior role. And at the time, I'd gone through all of the recruitment processes, done my case study interviews, psychometrics, etc., and managed to pass everything quite well. And what was left was just one meet and greet with the director at the company, and that was set for the Tuesday. The Thursday before, Cyril Ramaphosa announced that there would be the national lockdown. So I communicated with that company who was interested in taking me over, and essentially they said that despite you having passed everything phenomenally well, we would like to assess how we manage with the current staff complement before we hire anybody else. Now, I can imagine that this is something many South Africans have found themselves in, and we, in the context of the university with people who might have just finished their master's degree, honors, PhDs, or even undergrads last year, and are set to get into jobs, maybe some for the first time, and suddenly finding this door now closed. Now, on the other side of it, if you look at companies and companies that have been managing it, these companies and many companies have had to reevaluate how they run operations. And you've seen, although we've seen in most cases with most companies, human capital is the biggest item on one's budget, and you've seen companies cut down salaries from 100 to 80 to 70 to 50%, and some, all in all, just letting people go, unfortunately. And what this really highlights is the pressure on existing business models that many companies have. And as a company, as a small company, it's very important that we use this time to step back and ask ourselves, what are our business models based on? What are the fundamental principles that define what products we sell, that defines who we hire, that defines how we hire, that defines how do we create our presence in the market. And that's very important, I think, for companies to assess. Now, in accordance with this assessment, it's also important for companies and for even individuals yourselves who might be self-employed or working for companies to assess what is your value chain that you operate in. and where do you find yourselves in this? Now, to give a simple example, I'll use an example to illustrate this value chain of a tomato, right? We're all familiar with tomatoes. I would hope most of us are familiar with it. So if we take the tomato and we look at the value chain, so essentially the value chain is the beginning and end of any industry, right? And if we look at the value chain of a tomato, there's seeds, right? So you'll find people who specialize in seeding and being able to collect seeds and selling the seeds on to farmers, right? Then you have the farmers who then grow these tomatoes. But even in the part of the value chain of the farming itself is not just the farmers themselves, right? There's the water supply. In fact, in Australia, there's a massive turmoil around a shortage of water, and water actually becoming a commodity that people buy, like they buy gold and other shares. So a big component of this particular value chain, right? And you have technology in the farming sector that's gone really, that's really grown in the last couple of years. That's helped to create efficiencies there. So many different types of jobs already we're seeing, from the seeding to the farmers to water suppliers, fertilizer suppliers, the technology element towards that. Then you move on to the farmers then need to be able to sell these tomatoes onto somewhere, right? So you'll have wholesalers that are there, but just to get it there, there's the logistics industry as well, which interestingly enough has become one of the most resistant pandemic industries that are there due to a big, large boom in consumers buying, and especially online, but we'll get into that. So you have then, as I said, the seeding of the tomatoes, the farmers who are farming these tomatoes and the industries that are there, the logistics. The tomatoes need to move from point A to point B, and what you find is that demands in certain industries have grown so much that a lot of companies are looking for individuals to, if you've got a bucket, you have a small little truck that you could come and bring on board to be able to complement their existing fleet that they may have, and these are small businesses, right? So if you are in that space, you have a driver's license, you're already in a good position to potentially reposition yourself during these trying times. Now you've got those tomatoes that need to get to a store, right? Whether it's wholesalers or actual stores. Now, the stores themselves is an opportunity for employment, right? Definitely trading hours have changed. You've seen massive shortages of foods. At Woolworths have reported such cases. Checkers have also reported such cases where you have people within the first hour or two, everything sold out. So there's that component of the value chain of being a store and working for stores, looking for job opportunities at groceries and household essential goods, right? Now, over and above that, once you have these need to be sold. So you need consumers, and to sell, you need to advertise. There's a whole marketing industry that exists on whatever the product may be to what the consumers ultimately need to get. And the way in which advertising is going has phenomenally changed. People are finding more creative ways to be able to do that. So even looking into the advertising space, because regardless of how the pandemic evolves, people need to sell, and that's never going to die, right? So if you have skills that could complement that, that's always something good to look at. Then obviously you have the consumer, and in this space as well as the consumer, what we've seen is a massive rise in YouTube vloggers and bloggers that have come about in giving people creative new ways on how do you maximize what it is that you've bought from the store. 10 different ways on how you can use Coca-Cola. So a lot of these hacking approach of life, this has taken a great trend. So if you know that you're good at creative ways on, how to use a tomato 10 ways, different recipes you can make, especially now with you finding schools closing, there's many kids more at home. So mothers and kids' nutrition and healthy eating is now coming really into the focus of that as well. So, many people, your side hustles, your hobbies can easily become your saving grace during these times as well. So that is, I guess, the value chain of a tomato, right? And one would have to apply it to your own industry. Take a step back, have a study to where do I fall into the spectrum? What is dependent on? What is where I am dependent on? And what could I potentially feed into? Which is this essentially caused a lot of the economic stress. You find the oil prices have significantly dropped to the point of which they actually went below zero. And one might feel that doesn't affect you directly, but you simply take the fact of the oil price dropping so much, and looking at all the different byproducts that come from oil that we have, from the plastics we have, from the roads that we drive, and all of those things. When that's no longer viable to create that, there's different ways that governments and companies need to figure out how to rebalance that loss that's done there, especially because it's not effective. It's not fiscally beneficial for companies to keep producing oil in that case. Now, in this time, we also see that unemployment has massively risen. In South Africa, we're sitting at about a 30.1 unemployment rate. In the US, we have record unemployment in the millions. That sits there despite stimulus packages of trillions of dollars that have been unprecedented and never seen before. Europe has recently announced over $700 billion of relief packages to the European Union countries that are there. In South Africa, we have the 500 billion rand package that Cyril Ramaphosa has recently announced. So we've seen massive stimulus packages being brought out, but the truth of it is that the resistance of the supply chains, of the value chains that we find ourselves in, has left many people vulnerable, have left many people without potential outlook. So stepping back and studying potential knock-on effects of other industries to your industry might help you find new opportunities to be able to explore. The key thing that this pandemic is demanding is it's demanding people to be and to think of themselves of what they've never thought of themselves before. And what I essentially mean by that is that if you have studied one particular skill, like I said, you've studied farming, right? That might not necessarily be the most in demand skill right now, although farming is a very big demand at this moment in time. So not a great example, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. And so flexibility becomes key. We've seen the rise of many different technological learning platforms that have come on board, many of these for free. In fact, I was sitting with some of my interns yesterday going through Udemy, which is a great source for online courses, and making sure that they can identify a skill relevant to today's pandemic, and even more so to tomorrow's reality, and choosing one and essentially going for those. Interesting, those courses go for about 200 Rand, 180 Rand. So it's not as expensive. So although you may not be able to get into a job right now, the cost of the transportation to get to your new job, the outfit to dress up to be present, is more than even the cost of this course that's there. And a lot of these courses are not very data heavy. So you could essentially look at how do you upskill yourself relevant to the world where we're moving in. Now, the other thing is that the fundamentals of how we look at the economy have changed. We look at how do we define an asset before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID. You find even in the housing space as well, there's been a massive rise in rentals and the desire for rentals of homes R1 million and less. You've seen the prices of homes of 2 million rand and above significantly drop 5% and predicted to drop even into double digits figures going on, as the people who would traditionally buy those homes find themselves heavily disrupted by the pandemic and the economic effects of these pandemics. So even the idea of whether you buy or you rent has been challenged quite significantly, and I would really love for everybody to really rethink these topics as you find yourself in these measures. Start looking at investing as well as a possibility. We have great platforms like Easy Equities in South Africa that allows you to invest as little as 1 Rand. In fact, there are some shares there for 10 cents. So even your 10 Rand buys you a significant amount of that particular share. So look at how you can incrementally get into building positive habits such as investing. Look at platforms like 22/7 in South Africa as well, which is great for assessing how you spend. And you might find that by analyzing that, there's actually efficiencies you can get back, a couple of rands you can get back from not being aware of certain bank charges that you're paying, or picking up patterns of where you buy and how you can subsequently make some of the stuff that you're getting to buying it. So for businesses, it's really important to study your value chain, understand the industries outside of your industry that impact and pose a threat to it, and how you can constantly reposition yourself to that, and also be flexible. And I think in conclusion, I'd like to leave with this analogy of some sort that I've dubbed in previous interviews, which is around the knowing aspect, right? So you go from you don't know what you don't know, then you move from you now know what you don't know, then you go from you know now what you know, and eventually you want to get to where you know and you can sell on what you know, or you can share what you know, and that can be valuable. Now, That's very essential, because when you don't know what you don't know, the first part of departure is informing yourself, engaging yourself with what's happening in the economy, watching the news a little bit more, going onto social media platforms, journals of all kinds, industry-specific news to where you're from. Then once you've done that, now you know what you don't know. Then important to further on engage yourselves in online courses. There are many for free, many that you only pay for the certification post of that. So tons of it, but make sure you don't get caught up in analysis paralysis and learning for the sake of learning. Try to keep your learning targeted to where the demand is, to where the pandemic demands are currently being set. And then eventually you want to be able to find yourself and position yourself for sales. In fact, in many different countries, you've seen a large rise of job listings right now, although they're different to what you are looking. In fact, your job may no longer be part of the listing, but there's a great rise in them. So by going on this journey of not knowing what you don't know, acknowledging it, having peace about it, moving on to now knowing what you don't know, then taking what you know and know it really well to the point to which you can sell an on-share of it, will essentially help you to better position yourself during this pandemic. On that note, Michelle, thank you so much again for the privilege of being part of this webinar. Thank you all to the other speakers as well. We really hope that the inputs, as small as minute as they may be today, help you a little bit to figure out how you can navigate your own journey during this trying time. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so much for that, Olivier. I think something that really struck me about what you were discussing is the importance of where you position and insert yourself into a value chain. So especially considering the realities of what we're facing with COVID-19, I'm not sure how many NWU alumni would have thought that their side hustle or their hobby might be a unique opportunity for them to start questioning whether they fit into value chains that they had previously thought was not necessarily within their terrain. So definitely some food for thought. If anyone has any questions or comments for either Olivier or Francois, you're more than welcome to pop a comment in the comment box below, and we'll be in touch. Right, so next up we have nwu-pukke. She is, of course, an NWU alumnus. She's actually a law graduate. She is both a wife and a mother. And something that I have really found refreshing in how she often talks about herself is her superpower in really being able to venture into uncharted territory and to be able to make her mark. Something that I think a lot of NWU graduates want to aspire towards. So nwu-pukke, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the agripreneur space.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for the introduction. Everybody else, hello. My name is nwu-pukke. I am a law graduate, incidentally, from Northwest-Universiteit. But I am an agripreneur, and I think it's a very important day that, we're talking about this issue. It's very close to my heart, and I think it's a perfect opportunity to share my story, which I think would assist somebody else who's listening to this. Let me start off by really introducing myself. I am an agripreneur. What that means is that I am in agriculture, but on the business side of it. We've always been told that it is a way of life. I have a theory that it is a perfect space for an entrepreneur to thrive. I think it has potential to produce millions of billionaires. Yes. So the agriculture space, I think it's important to give a quick background as to where we've been as an industry. It would be very important to take the listeners on a small journey where we are, where we have been, and where we're headed, during this pandemic. The sector is one that has vast career opportunities. I think it's always been downplayed or maybe not well articulated to really attract, the energy of young people. It is one industry that has many layers that have, opportunity, galore. The agri space is not a place for old people who are tired or retirees. I think I should just say that from the onset. It is a perfect opportunity for young people, whether you have a degree, whether you have energy, and you have, the drive to do well in life. COVID-19 is bringing us to a space where we have to reevaluate a lot of things about a lot of industries, and ours is not immune to it. I think, in fact, ours is most crucial because food security in this, times is one of the very important topics that we have to address. Over the years, we've seen the decline of commercial producers. It is a concerning thing. And that to me says there is lots wrong with our systems. But today, the emphasis will not be on the political side of the industry. I think today's message will be specifically for entrepreneurs who are in this industry, entrepreneurs who want to be in this industry, and those who are not sure. I hope by the end of this discussion, I will have converted millions into the agri-space. So the agri-space is multifaceted, as I said. It means that it is not just about one person planting crops and harvesting and taking to the silos. The game has definitely changed. We are now in a space where it is more open. A lot of people are able to really understand the agri-sector. We produce food. We employ millions of people. We ensure that the world and our country keeps going. And I think it's important that we highlight that fact. If you are in a space that has, that much diversity, I think it's important that we put our resources, be venture capitalists, be governments, be private people, and ourselves also. A lot of people are telling us to now be very conscious of our money during these hard times. And I think it's important to be conscious, but that should not be mistaken for not using your money. I would encourage anyone who is in this space to really understand what the agriculture benefits could be, or possibilities could be. For the new entrants, if you do not have land, it is okay. There are opportunities in terms of ventures. We have crowdfunding schemes that are already now taking shape. There you buy portions or pieces into already existing businesses, whether you buy one animal as an investment opportunity that will help you grow. The second aspect is the investment opportunities also in the horticulture sector, where people are buying hectares, obviously, to sell to markets. Now, there's a huge gap between the producer and the market and the customer. So that to me highlights opportunities. We need software developers to come into play. We need product developers. We need graphics people. We need marketers. We need soil scientists right now, because we're talking agronomy, the whole agrarian revolution. We need people who are going to come in, and not just want to produce chard only, but want to take this chard and add value, which is basically a space for a lot of people to come in and occupy. Unlike other industries where you hear the market is saturated, the food market can never be saturated as the populations grow all the time. I think it's important that as a business or potential business, that you take a minute to really see this space for what it is. I think it is a great opportunity. You are able to venture, which is very important. You are able to really, get in, get a stake and maximize and make your money. Agri-space is huge. There is apiculture, if you did not know. Apiculture right now, there's a huge market for it. This is the practice of beekeeping. And if you did not know, bees don't only give you honey, but you've got propolis, you've got pollen, and those are, natural antibiotics, and they would really help us, especially around these, times where the COVID-19 pandemic has just taking a knock on a lot of things. There is heliculture, which is the snail production. I think the African giant snails are, big now for their both medicinal purpose and just for the luxury. There is aquaculture, the practice of fish, water related, commodities. There is horticulture, which is production of food, staples, things that we need on the table every day, which is quite important because we still have people who sleep without having anything to eat. And it's important that I mention that We've seen a decline in the number of commercial farmers over the years. However, we've seen the rise in number of people not being able to eat over the years also. So horticulture industry is quite, it's quite big, and it's waiting for a lot of people to dive in and, take occupation. We have livestock production, which over the years have had serious knocks. I feel like we've had lockdowns before the actual lockdown. We had the swine flu situation happening. We had the FMD, where we saw a lot of borders close and producers going, some broke. However, that situation has taught a lot of us to really understand the market and not just focus on the primary aspect of it, but the whole value chain. And I think it's important to highlight that the challenges that we've experienced over the years leading to this now current challenge has helped us to understand our strength, which is now opening it up. We say it's not just the animal, but it's the genetics. It's time that we're waiting for you, young person who's sitting at home, buy a nitrogen tank and, get the semen and get into those, markets. There's a huge opportunity there. We also have the poultry, situation where I know a lot of people will say, hey, but we're getting things dumped, but we also, have a huge market which still has to be filled in. I think it's very good that we are at a time where we are taking stock or taking note of what's happening around us. It would be an opportunity lost if one was not to encourage people to actually stand and take, a minute to see how they can put themselves in here. A lot of emphasis has been on people being careful with their money around this time. And I think as an entrepreneur, it's important to be careful with your money, but that should not mean you should not reinvest your money in the company. That should not mean that you should not grow your business, which is something that one has to clarify. It just says you have to be very strategic and understand what is it that you're putting your money in. I think it's the perfect time to revisit business plans right now. It's the perfect time to remodel your companies. Producing things and just dumping them at retailers is not sufficient anymore. Take a minute and see where you're placing your business. You have to now engage with your customers. I think they call it the lean method, where you produce and you have your customers, get the goods. This is the time where you're thinking, how do I then also increase or create my logistics side of the business? That's why I'm saying these times are actually perfect for us to really explore the possibilities and really go for it. And I think right now we are better off than the ones that came before us, because we've got information at the touch of our finger. We are able to talk to people not only within our vicinity, but the whole wide world web is connecting us to people even beyond borders. And that to me says that's also a market. Population is going to grow. And a lot of people have said in the media that there's a fear that we will not meet our daily food requirements. To me, that says if we're going to grow that big, it means we need more soldiers. It means we need more investment. Let us then gather all the resources, the academic world, the governments, the private individuals, and the farmers. We cannot afford to work in silos at the moment. I think it's the perfect time to be really doing ventures. It's the perfect time to really work together to put proper systems in place. I think the COVID-19 and the lockdown have emphasized very interesting things in terms of our infrastructural development and where a lot of our investment have been going. And it has become abundantly clear that there is a lot of things that have to be revisited. It is time now that we sit down and do plans. It's time now that people come in and actually see things for what they are. We've seen the scariest things where water levels or dam levels have gone to, levels that we've never seen ever. The droughts, but we can't solely blame it on the droughts. It says we were not prepared. It's very important that we take all these lessons in moving forward. And I think it's the time to be placing ourselves as the frontiers of this new era, where people are coming in. A farmer who's just like me is not just sitting out there getting her tan on, but actually understands where my product is going from my farm up until it reaches my end user. And whether the satisfaction, it meets the standard of the end user. I think it's that time where our businesses are not just silos, but we're ventures, because with that, it helps us to really manage our risk. It is time to open up the scope and not be so closed in. When I started out, it was tough. I am this young girl who is a first generation farmer. And the industry has generational farmers, has patriarchy, but I understand that should not be a deterrent. In fact, it is extra motivation for me to push on. So if I can do it, I certainly know that there are more people out there, and especially who can push and do beyond. So it is basically the perfect time for entrepreneurs, young people to rise up and take their spaces. So, I can talk all day, but I think it's important that I highlight that it is actually a great opportunity for us to seize the day. Come up to, the plate, play, get in, understand, and don't fear, because fear is debilitating. So with that, entrepreneurs, it is the time for you to take the baton and run. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you so very much for that, Ntobi Singh. That is massively inspiring. I think something that stands out for me is the angle that you really bring about within sometimes male-dominated spaces, the importance of you as a woman taking charge of your career, your prospects, and really inspiring, whether it be women or men, to think about the agripreneur space in a way that they previously wouldn't have. I think there are some great links as well. Once again, I see that value chains are really coming up as an important theme amongst our panelists. So I think in a completely different way for anyone that happens to be watching this to ask questions, whether they are involved with software or graphic design or soil scientists. I'm not sure that they would have thought that there is a space for them within becoming an agripreneur. So really, really something inspiring for me as an economist, and I'm pretty sure for any one of the NWU alumni watching this. Right, so that brings us to the conclusion of our NWU alumni webinar. Thank you so much to everyone that's watching. If you have any questions or comments, again, please do pop them into the chat. But so I suppose in closing, during a time when we may all be going through a lot of difficulties in our own personal lives, and whether it be how we start to question where we situate ourselves as young professionals, I think that if there's anything that stands out to me in what we've heard our panelists talk about today, it's that much as there are challenges and difficulties, and not just our country, but the world is going through a harrowingly difficult time, for us to also ask the important questions about where are the opportunities in everything that we're facing. And so if there's anything for us to take from what our speakers have really urged us to do and encouraged us to do, is for us to take this upon ourselves and ask, how can we get involved? How can we make a difference? And how can we act? And so I'm really hoping that in the potentially difficult and challenging times ahead, that this is an opportunity for each one of us to act in a way that makes sure we have a stronger and better economy.
you.